Right. Hello, everyone. Thank you all for coming to our workshop on how to prepare for severe weather events and other emergencies. My name is Jane Pariel, and I am from the Center for Population Health at Cheshire Medical Center and the Greater Monadnock Public Health Network. We also have Sylvia Rice here from the Greater Monadnock Medical Reserve Corps. And we also have Vanessa Palangi here from HSEM, who will be helping us direct some questions and answer anything that you may have. The purpose of this workshop is to discuss 3 strategies to protect your health and safety before, during, and after a severe weather event or other emergency. A community's response to an emergency is improved when individuals and families are also prepared to address their own needs. So that requires thinking about situations in advance and prior to these events actually occurring and planning for such of these events. So next slide. So on today's agenda, we'll talk about our rationale for developing the educational opportunity that we have provided here for everyone today. We'll spend the bulk of our time on 3 activities, which will be preparing for extreme precipitation events and severe weather with emergency kits, early warning systems, and then creating your own personal emergency plan. Our goal for this webinar is going to make sure that you guys learn about why emergency preparedness is important. You kind of get a sense of what your level of preparedness is and make use of the materials and technical assistance here that we provide you, whether that is developing your first plan or perhaps actually developing and refining an existing plan that you have or kits that you have at home already. Next slide. So we're going to go over a few of the functions for the Zoom webinar today. So we have the chat function here below, so you're able to ask questions. Well, actually, you'll be able to respond to even stories when we have activities and discussion points. You'll be able to respond through the chat function there. Next slide. If you want to verbally speak out and ask a question or request to speak, there is the raise hand function. So if you are recognized to talk, you may be prompted to unmute yourself. And then also the raise hand in the webinar control actually stays up for a little bit. So once you've been prompted to speak up, we ask that you click on that hand again, so that way we don't still think that you are waiting to speak up. Next slide. And the last Zoom function was we have the Q&A window. So this allows anyone to ask questions throughout the webinar. If you don't feel comfortable speaking up or if you don't want to interrupt at that time, you can feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A, and we can either, as the host and panelist, be able to respond back through text through you for the Q&A window for everybody to see, or we can answer the questions live at the very end of the session. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So let's talk about who we are. A lot of you may not know. So we're the Greater Monadnock Public Health Network and the Greater Monadnock Medical Reserve Corps. So the Public Health Network is a community health and safety collaborative, which works to enhance and improve public health related services. And we're one of the 13 public health networks in the state of New Hampshire. So we strive to increase collaboration and planning across municipal boundaries and the health and safety sectors. It is made up of members of each coalition community, as well as representatives from regional organizations involved with providing for the public's health and safety. The Medical Reserve Corps is a community-based civilian volunteer program that helps public health infrastructure of communities nationwide. So each MRC unit, which includes our Greater Monadnock one, is organized and trained to address a wide range of challenges, from public health education for example, this webinar, as well as to disaster response. For example, our COVID-19 response that we had with even vaccine clinics. So currently, our Greater Monadnock Medical Reserve Corps has about over 150 volunteers, which is great. To read more about our region's MRC, you can visit our website that we have, which is www.gmmrc.org. And I just also want to acknowledge that this project was made possible through the New Hampshire Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Public Health Services, through the grant for Center of Disease Control. Next slide. So we are actually going to do a pre-survey for everybody here that's attending. So we will prompt up a poll soon to ask everyone their questions about just their general preparedness and how how they feel, like what they have already ready. So the reason that we do this survey is kind of just get a baseline of knowledge from all our participants. And so we can see how we can improve the effectiveness of the content in this workshop, as well for future participants. And we also have a post survey as well too, to see how much you've learned from before the webinar to afterwards. So I'm going to allow some time for you guys to fill up the poll questions that are coming up on your screen right now. And I'll let you know that this information that you're providing, it will not be shared with anyone else other than the Greater Monadnock Public Health Network, Medical Reserve Corps, and Southwestern Region Planning Commission. It's just for us to know our baseline knowledge and see what you've learned throughout the webinar. So we'll show you a little bit more as we wait for more people to finish out the survey. And just a reminder, there is a page 2 for this as well too, for the survey. It's going to be a little bit shorter than the first one. Okay, so if you want to move on to the next slide. All right, so we have your second page 2 coming in. It's a little bit shorter than the previous one, so I ask that everyone fill that out as well. Okay, still I'm gonna wait just a little bit more.
Jane, someone's asking about, there was a question at the very end that was untitled. They're asking about it in the chat.
I think that may have been an error for that one. You can click either option 1, option 2. That was an error question on our end. So either one does not matter which one we're click response on. Thank you, Vanessa. All right. Just by a show of hands, is everyone mostly complete with page 2 of the survey? Okay. All right, I think we can go on to the next slide then. So I also want to let everybody know that there's going to be a flashlight / radio giveaway. And so there's going to be 3 drawings at the end of the webinar. So participants who complete the pre and post survey will be eligible, and they're going to be awarded randomly, and winners will be notified through following the session, via email. So I just want to let everyone know that you'll need to complete the pre-survey, which we just did, and then the post survey, and that's how you're eligible to get those. So now I'm going to have Sylvie Rice take over for our first part of our discussion and the first part of our webinar. Sylvie?
Okay. I guess we're ready for the next slide. Right, so hopefully Henry is going to initiate a quick poll. Normally we would do a show of hands if we were in person. So the questions I have for you, thank you, Henry. The first one, have you created a personal emergency preparedness plan? And the next question, have you created an emergency preparedness kit? And do you have a weather radio or subscribe to weather alerts on a mobile device? And have you talked about these things with family members or caregivers? And once Henry compiles the responses, we'll flash them up on the screen, I believe. Has everyone had a chance to respond? Well, why don't we move on to the next screen? Oh, here we go. Here's the poll. So it looks like we're doing so 50-50 almost on the first and second questions. I'm really glad to see that 80% of you have a weather radio or subscribe to weather alerts on your cell phone or other devices. And that you have talked about these things with other family members and caregivers. So we're making good progress, and thank you for that. All right. So next slide, please. So our learning objectives today are really to do 4 things. One is to identify climate and weather-related health hazards. Also to gather information on appropriate disaster supplies and equipment that you might need to stay safe. Learn how to understand and use early warning systems. And finally, to begin your own emergency preparedness plan and communication plan. So as a little bit of background, the severe weather trends have been increasing both in the Monadnock region and in the Northeast. I also want to discuss a little bit between the relationship between climate, weather, and health. And then also give a little bit of time to talk about your personal experiences with severe weather events. As you all are aware, we had over 5 inches of rain just 2 weeks ago, and there was significant flooding in Keene, in Peterborough, and other communities nearby. This is just an example of a severe weather event, which is weather as compared to climate, but we've seen more and more of these happen in the past few years. The most significant flood that we've had in recent memory is the October 9th flood in 2005, where over almost 9 inches of rain fell. And it was the worst since the floods in the 1930s. We've also had several other floods in Keene since then. And of course, this summer, again, we've had it. Had the flood 2 weeks ago. And in fact, today there's actually a weather advisory for tonight with severe thunderstorms that may be moving through with bringing high winds as well. Let's see, in 2008, we had a very serious ice storm. And actually, when I worked for the college, one of my responsibilities was as an emergency preparedness coordinator and looking at all the host of emergencies that the college might find themselves impacted by. I thought that an ice storm of a prolonged event, such as about 2 weeks, would be the one of the worst that the college could face, because if you had a severe ice storm in this area that went on for more than a week, it would be very difficult to get supplies in and out of Keene. So for example, at the college, they would get fuel deliveries every day of the winter. They had probably a week's supply of fuel oil to heat the buildings. But if you couldn't get the fuel oil in every day, that would cause a real concern for us. So there are different weather events. Usually we think of flooding and ice storms first and foremost, but there are also microbursts, tornadoes, hurricanes, drought, air quality, which we have been experiencing the last couple of days. I've been getting alerts on my phone. Those are caused by the smoke of the forest fires out west. And so we really can't just worry about our own local weather and climate, but we really have to worry about it on a global basis. That smoke from the fires out west are actually expected to impact Europe as well. You also have high heat. We've seen a number of deaths in the Northwest this year, and that's unprecedented for them. And high winds. Now, also with climate change, those are all weather events, but climate trends are really long, the weather averaged over a long period of time. And since 1970 in New Hampshire, we've seen the average annual maximum temperature warm by about 2.6 degrees Fahrenheit. And the days below freezing have also decreased. And the length of the growing season is 2 to 5 weeks longer. We've also seen more annual precipitation and more extreme precipitation events, as I mentioned earlier. One of these impacts is also that we end up having more problems from vector-borne diseases like ticks and mosquitoes. And of course, with Lyme disease, ticks are a real hazard. So that's one of the consequences of changes in climate. Going on to the next one. Again, we've seen increases in extreme hot days. And, we now have to worry about cooling centers for people if they don't have air conditioning. And again, more extreme precipitation events. So now I just want to concentrate a little bit on flooding, because flooding has such a severe impact on people. It can result in physical injury, death, or displacement. Flooding can also contaminate water supplies and produce mold in buildings, as well as just disrupting essential infrastructure by taking out bridges, flooding roadways, etc. Secondary consequences of flooding usually our furnaces are located in our basements, so they would be impacted and we might lose our heat. You can also have carbon monoxide poisoning, partly from using generators that aren't set up appropriately. Again, lost work days for people trying to clean out their basements and mitigate the results of the flooding. Increase in waterborne and foodborne diseases. Just the stress from the mental health impacts of being flooded out is very severe, or can be. And again, it can also impact our ability to provide emergency response services and healthcare to our vulnerable populations. Next slide, please. How has severe weather such as a flood impacted your life? If you'd like to share your stories, maybe you can do that in the chat feature, and we can sort of go over them if people want to, or we can unmute you as well. And then I also want you to think about how you can prepare for severe weather in your own home as well. Does anyone want to contribute a story, their own personal story about this? If not, I can tell you about how I was impacted by the October 2005 flood. At the time, I was living in Marlborough, and we were very fortunate that we weren't personally flooded. But at the time of the flood, I was having my kitchen redone, and the shop where the cabinets were being made were off of Carpenter Street in Keene at St. Martin's Lane Cabinetry. And unfortunately, that business flooded, and I have photographs that unfortunately I don't have with me right now, but of my cabinets floating around the shop with a canoe being paddled through the shop at the time. So that was my own personal experience with it. Okay, well.
Sylvie, there's one attendee, Terry, who may have something to share. And
oh, great. Can we unmute her and have her tell her story? Okay, Terry, can you unmute yourself?
Yep. Can you hear me?
Yeah. Hi.
Hi, this is Terry Johnson. And yeah, I just want to briefly relay a flood that I experienced in 1995 when I lived in the New Orleans area. We had 21 inches of rain one night, and then within 12 hours had another 25 inches of rain. So it was horrendous. And I lived on the North Shore of Lake Pontchartrain across from New Orleans at the time, but I had family that was living right in New Orleans, and they were not too far away from the Mississippi River. And I watched the water rise around my house on the North Shore of Lake Pontchartrain, but we were up relatively high, so nothing happened there. But my wife happened to be with her parents in New Orleans at their house, and they had 4 feet of water in there that night. And just to show how scary it can be for a person that's experiencing this in the middle of the event, until the power went out, I was getting calls from my wife who was talking about the rising water level that she and her mother were experiencing in the house. And they Originally, it was up to their ankles, and then it started approaching the seat level of the couch. And then she told me that she was sitting up on the top. They were both sitting on the top of the couch as the water continued to rise. Then they heard the boat in the garage rise and start crashing through the upper ceiling. And in the meantime, I'm sitting there, not able to do anything to help them. And fortunately, everything turned out in the final analysis. But it was, of course, really scary for them, wondering just how high the water was going to go. And scary for me too, since I was not able to help, and emergency crews were not able to get out to the homes in the area that they lived in either. So they were on their own.
That sounds pretty horrendous. Thank you for sharing that, Terry. It's a good reminder that when you're involved in, or when you're experiencing an emergency like that, it's often very difficult for emergencies responders to get to you right away. And that's part of what this webinar is about. So Jane, do you want to, are there any other stories, Henry?
No others with their hand up.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next slide.
Okay, so next we're going to be talking about how to be prepared with having your own emergency kit. So we have a video that we'll be playing for you guys. So Henry, if you want to move on to the next slide where we can access that video.
We live in a world that's unpredictable. Without warning, we may have to make quick decisions that impact the health and safety of our loved ones. It's easy to assume that we'll be able to gather what we need when something unexpected happens, but few of us really know what will make the difference. This is preparing a family emergency kit in plain English. Imagine that your neighborhood begins to flood in the middle of the night. You may have to leave your home quickly, or wait until local authorities tell you where and when it's safe to go. In either situation, you want to be able to take care of your family for at least 72 hours while emergency workers help those in urgent need. Having a well-stocked, portable, and easy-to-find emergency kit will help make sure that you have the basic supplies to keep you and your family safe, no matter where you are. Let's talk about what goes into that kit. In an emergency, the basic services we use every day may not work. For example, your water, electricity, gas, and telephone service may not work, and it may be impossible to access cash from a bank. When these services are not available, an emergency kit can provide the basic necessities. For example, we all need water. The rule of thumb is 2 liters per person per day for 72 hours, or 3 days. It's a good idea to use small bottles that can be carried easily. Of course, we also need food. Because your kit needs to be ready at all times, use food that won't spoil, like canned goods, energy bars, or dried food that can be stored longer. If needed, baby formula and pet food may be a good idea. And remember a manual can opener to open those cans. So now your kit has a good start: food and water. What else? Well, it's dark and there's no electricity. A flashlight and radio will be handy to see where you're going and help you stay informed. These both need power, so pack extra batteries. Or even better, buy the type that can be powered manually with a crank. Cordless phones don't work when there's no electricity. Consider including a phone with a cord, too. Of course, an emergency kit wouldn't be complete without a first aid kit with the basics like bandages, antiseptic, and pain relievers. With these items, food and water, flashlight and radio, and a first aid kit, we've covered the basics. But there are some items that may not be so obvious. For example, it may be very difficult to get prescription medications in an emergency, or even long afterward. Including a couple of weeks' worth of medication in the kit will help. While you're thinking about medical needs, consider what equipment may be needed to accommodate family members with special needs. As we mentioned, it may be difficult to get cash from banks, so include small bills and change, as cash registers may not work. Lastly, keeping important documents like copies of birth certificates, wills, passports, and insurance policies in your kit can make it easier to stay organized during an emergency. Remember to include a copy of your emergency plan and contact information for friends and family who may be able to help. We all hope that emergencies don't occur and your kit goes unused, but that's no reason to delay. It's your responsibility to start gathering supplies and thinking about what your family will need for at least 72 hours in an emergency. It may look like a lot to do, but you can print an emergency kit checklist, and the next time you're running errands, pick up a few items for your kit, or buy a prepackaged one. Having an emergency kit is an easy way to have more peace of mind in an unpredictable world. For more information, visit getprepared.ca.
Okay, so I know that they mentioned about having a clickable and kind of a PDF version of an emergency kit like checklist. And so actually we are providing that for you guys. So if you want to go to the next slide. And we're going to start our next activity. So we're going to be sending through the chat function a PDF that everyone will be able to access and then go through and see what items they already have on them. So Henry, if you can send that through the chat function. Oh, perfect. You did already. So if you open up that PDF, you'll be able to click on it and see what you have, what's on the list. And so like mentioned in the video, you know, we have water and non-perishable food for actually supposed to be at least the very minimum 3 days. An extra cell phone battery or charger, and that we have to keep mindful of because we know that batteries tend to expel the white chemicals if it's been out too long. So we got to always double check that too, so you don't keep in your kit for too long. So that's why we always recommend battery powered or hand crank radio, just to kind of avoid those situations. Flashlight and extra batteries, a first aid kit, whistle to signal for help. And then, you know, even now, especially with COVID, we always suggest to add mask in there, hand sanitizers, gloves, some moist towelettes, garbage bags, and then anything like a wrench or pliers to turn off utilities, can opener if you have canned food in your emergency kit. So another way you can actually avoid having a can opener is if you buy canned food that has the pull tops on them. And that way you don't have to have that extra item in there if you have only food that you can pull through without a can opener. You can have local maps in your area because you don't know in an emergency if you're gonna have a power supply available to access, you know, GPS on your phone or anything like that. Another thing that's on this list is prescription medication and glasses. So I do want to let everyone know too, when you think about prescription medication, you may think of just over-the-counter top medication, Advil, Tylenol. Think about for your own personal needs what you'll need. For me, example, I have asthma, and so I think like, okay, I'll need my inhaler. But I also have to consider the fact sometimes when I have severe asthma, and if there's an event emergency such as flooding, there may be more pollutants in the air that will cause my asthma to act up, and I need my nebulizer at that time. So I had to kind of prepare for that as well and pack that ahead of time and need that medication for it. So you have to tailor your emergency preparedness kit for what you and your personal needs and your family members' needs are, not just what you off the top of your head would think about, but just, you know, if you need battery packs for certain medical utilities or anything like that. Glasses are very useful to have if you have correction eyewear, for example. You don't want to be worried about carrying, if you wear contact lenses, carrying solution, running out of contact lenses. Glasses are the safe bet to go through. If you have a child with you, you'll need infant formula and diapers, any pets that you have in your household, pet food, water, any supplies you'll need for your pet. And that does also include medication for your pet as well, if you have pets that need medication. And especially to carry family and important documents. So you want to make sure that you keep your, you know, passport, driver's license in our copies of those items, bank account information in one of those waterproof pouches, so that you want to make sure that you have that ready to go. And as the video had mentioned, we want to make sure we don't only rely on bank cards and banking information, because in an event of an emergency, you're going to have a less likelihood of having access to those banks. So you want to make sure that you have a little bit of cash on you and some change so that you're ready to go. Also included, you know, some first aid books if you know, because you want to make sure that anyone who has access to your emergency kit can know how to properly use your first aid kit. Even a sleeping bag or a warm blanket, and consider additional bedding. Since we do live in New Hampshire and it can get cold here, you want to consider that as well. And you want to make sure that you also have a complete change of clothing, because you do not know when the next time that you need to leave your household, when you'll be able to go back in. And when I say this as well, you have to consider cold weather climate and warm weather climate. So we always recommend that you change your the items in your emergency supply kit at least twice a year, once for the warmer weathers, once for the colder weathers, because you want to make sure that if there's an emergency and you have your kit ready to go, let's say the last time that you packed it was in warm weather, but it's winter time when there's an emergency, and we want to make sure that you have the appropriate clothing in your kit ready to go, and not have t-shirts and shorts, but you have something that's going to keep you warm in that time. If you can fit into your kit, we'd like to recommend that you keep a fire extinguisher or matches in a waterproof container, so that way you have some source of heat, any family supplies or personal hygiene items. And we mentioned hand sanitizer earlier. And then also another thing I'd like to recommend, something to keep you busy, because we tend to rely on a lot of technology nowadays. And, we think that that's like, our main source of entertainment. And during an emergency, you may have to do a lot of sitting and waiting, and kind of, you're in this limbo period. So to keep yourself entertained, pack some books, pack an activity, pack card games, something like that, that will help you keep yourself occupied, keep your children occupied if you have children in your family, so that you're not completely bored, but it also doesn't rely on any electricity as well. So you don't have to worry about that either. Next slide. So Henry, can we go back to, perfect, awesome. And so I know you're all thinking, this is a lot you're asking me to do. Like, this is gonna cost me so much money. Well, we have some tips for preparing on a budget. So while many of us may have a majority of these items, already on hand, probably have some canned goods, probably have some granola bars already. Some of the items that you saw on that list, they need to be purchased. So it doesn't mean that it needs to be an expensive endeavor. And there's some simple tips that you can use to prepare for a budget. So once you identify through that checklist the items that you need to purchase, make a list and wait for those items to go on sale. And then instead of purchasing also like 3 gallons of water per person per day, we suggest that you fill up on empty soda and water bottles with tap water. And then be sure to thoroughly clean and sanitize the bottles first. Also, when a storm's expected, you can fill your bathtub actually with water in case you lose water. So that water that's in the bathtub can be used to wash dishes, flush the toilet, and that way you don't use your drinkable water to do other household chores or household things that you need to do. In addition, a typical water or home water heater can provide up to 30 or more gallons of clean drinking water. And this is a little tricky, and the water may be hot, but you can find further instructions online how to do this. And it's on FEMA's website as well. There's a PDF. I'm gonna see if I can actually share that with in the chat function, everybody. One sec. I'm not sure. Henry, are you able to send that PDF actually to all the attendees?
Yes, Jane. I think there's some difficulty in who can access it via the chat, and I want to let folks know who aren't reading the chat. We'll be sharing these materials with you via email for you to download and access afterwards.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. So we'll send that as well afterwards, so you guys have access to that. Also, when bad weather is approaching, it seems like everyone's first instinct when you go to the grocery store, stock up on bread, stock up on milk, stock up on eggs. First thing though, however, is that milk does go bad pretty quickly. And so if you lose power, you may lose that milk that you just bought, or your eggs need to get cooked right away. So that's like you use them in the first instinct, but that's also limiting on what you can have for other food wise too. So just think about items that your family can prepare without power, that's going to be nutritious as well as satisfying for you. want to make sure that you're eating something that you actually enjoy and not begrudgingly eating it. So stockpile those foods instead of, wasting your money on food that products will go bad if you lose power and you just cannot cook them in time. Many of these preparedness items can be found at the dollar store as well, or other discount stores. And then finally, you can set a preparedness budget and purchase one item from your list that you need each time you go shopping, or maybe get one item per month. So you kind of like constantly keep that up to date, and then you're making sure that you have that and it's within your budget. Next slide. Okay, so I'm wondering if we're able to do this by a show of hands, or if anyone wants to speak up. We're gonna have some discussion questions. So if you have had to shelter in your home for 3 days without electricity, name 2 items that you would need to add to your stay kit. And then if you had to leave your home in 30 minutes, what are 2 important items that you would put into your to-go bag? See if we can do a show of hands if that's working, and then we can answer on people or call on people to unmute themselves and give their answers. Is anyone that would like to speak up and share their answers? I see we have one answer on here in the chat function. So one thing that you would, and can I actually unmute you, Betty, if that's okay, to answer so that you can answer for yours?
Yeah, I think that I'd like to have some bottled coffee handy, since I won't be able to use my coffee maker. And those are things that have to be rotated out like every 3 months or so.
That's a good idea. Yeah, exactly. Think about what you need personally. And I think, yeah, for me especially, I think bottled coffee would be a good idea. I rely on my caffeine too much. And I see, Susan, you wrote down that you would need a battery radio as well, which is a good idea. Yep, to keep that, to add that in your kit. So that's really good. I know for me, if I have 3 days without electricity, some items I have in my stay kit, definitely some books, because I'm about entertainment. I think I get bored easily. So I'd like to have that in my stay kit. And then, oh, I see Lisa wrote down pet medicine. That's a good one as well. And then let's go on for if you had to leave the house in 30 minutes, 2 important items to go in your in your own to-go bag. So I think for me, 2 important items other than medication and then my important documents, I would think I had to say some type of activity book or some type of card games. And then also some comfort food. I think like a comfort snack, because I would have a lot of anxiety that I would have. So I probably would have that as well. And then I have some other people. Let's see what the chat says. Susan said food and water for me and my pets, and cage for the cats. It's a good idea. Yep. So especially if you have pets, make sure you pack for them as well. And then James, he says, oh, you second the recommendation of an inhaler. Exactly. And then I ran into that problem where I ran into an inhaler running low. And this actually a little anecdote that I have. I had family that live in India, and in 2018, there was a massive dam that kind of was let out, and flooding had happened within the matter of minutes. Houses were completely submerged, and we had limited communication because, of course, my parents are here in the US, and so we're trying to communicate with them. And from what I had heard, they were stranded on like the very attics of their houses for days before help could come and get them. And there was boats like out flooded completely in the streets. And the number one thing is I have an uncle who has asthma, and he had to rush back into his house and trudge through murky kind of contaminated water that flooded through to get his inhaler. And thankfully that was still safe. But that's kind of my wake up call for me, was when I heard that. I'm like, I got to make sure I keep that, because I didn't think about my inhaler or other medications I may need in an emergency. And he said that was one thing he was happy to get through. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. All right, and I'll have Sylvie take over here for talking about early warning systems and messages.
Thanks, Jane. Yeah, so the most important thing you can do, especially with severe weather related emergencies, is to have your situational awareness. Make sure you sort of know what's predicted for a few days out. I know I have on my phone an app for the National Weather Service that I sort of keep an eye out on the weather for 4 to 5 days in advance. The other thing is to sign up for the emergency alert system that we will talk about. That really helps because I'll send you early warnings messages to your phone so you know if anything is happening right away. The most important thing though is to verify your sources. So don't rely on Facebook so much. There's a lot of misinformation that goes around, especially during an emergency. So try to get your information from official sources, radio stations, news stations, etc. They try to send out the best messages possible. And in terms of that as well, is try to remain patient. You know, the emergency responders and the people in charge of emergencies are doing the best they can to get out appropriate information to you. And sometimes that takes a little bit of time to make sure they're sending out the right information that will help you. Next. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about the different terms that people use. There's hazardous weather outlooks. That sort of is the things that the National Weather Service comes up with. That sort of lets you know that there might be thunderstorms coming later this evening or this afternoon. So you sort of keep an eye on that. And then the next thing are watches. So a flood watch is basically telling you to be aware that the conditions are right for flooding to occur in your area. And so you really want to pay attention to that. If you live in a flood prone zone, you might want to move boxes off the floor in the basement and get ready for that. And just be prepared to evacuate, you know, sort of find your emergency kit, make sure it's up to date, collect anything else you need, for example, medications. I mean, emergency kits are great, but you want to make sure that you rotate the stock within them. I know I have water that I've stored in my basement for now 10 years, and I need to remember to cycle it out and use it for watering my plants while I'm waiting, and replenishing it now and then. You need to have a plan and know where to go if you need to reach higher ground quickly and on foot. You know, Terry's story, hair-raising story about his mother and parents was really frightening, because they, you know, it looked like they were sort of running out of space to get higher and higher when the flooding occurred. Prepare your home. Like with the high wind tonight, I'm going to make sure my my umbrella is down, lying down, and that everything's closed up. If you are expecting really high winds, you probably want to move your lawn furniture into a safe place, etc. If you are really worried about when we get into the flood warning, you want to make sure you disconnect your electrical appliances and be very careful about touching electrical equipment if you're in wet or standing water. And if instructed, know how to turn off your gas and electricity at the main switch or valve. That's really important for preventing fires and explosions. Next slide, please. So there is another possible warning that you'll get before the flood warning, and that is a flood advisory, which again, if you look at a watch as being prepared, the advisory is to be aware. So there's a little bit of distinction in those terms. But with a flood warning, that means you need to take action, that flooding is either happening or will happen shortly in your area. Now, of course, in Keene, I live in West Keene, and it's pretty unlikely that we'll have real flooding in this area, maybe our basements might flood, but if you live in downtown Keene in the East Keene neighborhood near Beaver Brook, there's a really good possibility that you may experience real flooding. So you need to make sure that you move immediately to higher ground or stay on high ground, and listen carefully to any alerts, evacuate if you're directed, and make sure you avoid walking or driving through floodwaters. Just remember the saying, turn around, don't drown. Just 6 inches of moving water can knock you down, and 1 foot of water can sweep your vehicle away. And this is really important because the other thing with water is if you have down power lines, you could be electrocuted. So next slide, please.
Sylvie,
Yes.
can I jump in? We just have a question in the chat about putting items in a dishwasher to keep them safe from flooding.
Oh, yes, I've heard that. And I've heard mixed advice about that. Some people say it's a good idea. I've also read that that's not true. Does Jane, do you know, or Henry, have you heard about that?
I haven't. Vanessa might have pointed out because she has something to add.
Oh, good.
Snopes has debunked it. So it has been debunked several times online. I know that I think it came about because of Facebook. There was a post on Facebook telling people to do that. So it's another one of those situations, as Sylvie mentioned, where you may see something on Facebook, but you really want to do your research behind it before just blindly following what it says.
Thank you, Vanessa. That's why, thanks for confirming that for me. So make sure you do unplug your electrical appliances if you have time to do so, and shut off any electric circuits if you can, and you've got gas service. And if your car stalls during a flood, get out immediately and leave it where it is. If water is entered into your basement or garage, try not to walk through it until you make sure the power is off. And do not try to drive over a flooded road. And again, be very aware of down power lines. Also, do not allow children to play around high water, storm drains, or any flooded areas. I know I have a friend who lives in East Keene who was talking about the flooding last week, and she said that she saw parents letting their children play in the flood waters. There were also cars driving through the flooded areas to make sure that they could spray everybody and really making a mess. Try not to do that, please. Next. Okay, so we're going to talk about, I'm sorry, let's see.
So we'll be talking about how to sign up for NH Alerts. So if for those who don't know, NH Alerts is a service offered by the New Hampshire Department of Safety that's used to issue public notices as well as severe weather warnings by the National Weather Service. So it also serves as a central location for enrolling in Code Red, which is an emergency notification system, which certain New Hampshire communities can actually subscribe to. We want to show you guys how you can sign up for free, and I'm wondering, because I know the chat function has been a little wonky, if we can put the URL there. If not, we'll send it afterwards to all of the attendees, but we can pull up at least what the form looks like when you register online. Pen, if you want to pull that up. So this is the URL. We'll send that to everybody afterwards, but this is what the main page looks like when you sign up for NH Alerts. And you can actually create an account, even if you have a Gmail, you can do so with your Facebook. If you happen to have a Twitter, or if you want to not have to deal with that and create your own account, you can create your own username and password as well. Right there that Henry's highlighting to create your own account, and that way you can be notified about any alerts or weather alerts that occur in our area. Okay, so let's go on back to the slides, and then we can have our next discussion. Okay, so I'm going to start with the first question, and if anyone wants to either use the chat function or would like to raise their hands and kind of speak up, feel free to do so. The first question is, can you guys name 1 or 2 ways to be alerted to severe weather related information? So including like early warning. Anyone would like to pull up through the chat function? Let's see. Do we have anyone who'd like to speak up? Oh, I see Mark says local news channels or NOAA. Yep, that's a good one. Would anyone think that looking through Twitter or Facebook through a friend would be a good idea? Just based on what we spoke about earlier today.
Hey, Jane,
Yes, so-
this is Henry. I'd just make a quick comment that there are some great like authoritative sources on Twitter and social media. For example, New Hampshire, HSCM, your town or city may be publishing alerts there.
Yep, I was actually just going to comment. I saw that James had wrote down local emergency departments on Twitter, and that's a great source. I wanted to clarify when I said Facebook and Twitter, it was more of just saying through word of a friend, for someone that you personally know that is posting something without a source. You do not want to trust that. If it's through local towns or through emergency departments or emergency management in your town or anything like that for local news channel through Facebook or Twitter, 100% you can rely on those services. And then the second question is, if you didn't have electric power, how would you get alerts and information? Oh, I see Betty wrote down the chat that she keeps the phone number for Eversource outages. Perfect. And then Mark has wrote down cell phone as well. Yep, that's a good source. Anybody else? Another one we could also say is a hand crank radio too, to make sure that you have that access to information and you don't need to rely on electric power as well. Okay, so next we can go on the next slide for discussion. And Sylvia here is going to talk about creating your own personal plan.
Okay, so it's a really good idea to prepare your own personal family disaster plan, and then also to practice it annually if you can. And you could pick, you know, a certain date, maybe with daylight savings or some other time, so you remember to do it. And you should just describe methods for helping your own personal resilience, including ways to keep your physical and mental health and well-being intact during an emergency, and sort of just figure out risk mitigation strategies for you and your family. So moving on to the next one. So there are several plans you should have in place. One is for shelter in place. So for example, if there's a tornado warning or a severe thunderstorm or high winds, you need to know where to go in your house. So in a tornado, you want to go to the basement if you can, or to an interior room, like a bathroom or whatnot with a few windows in it to be in the highest protective area. In other cases, you may be asked to evacuate. If there's a forest fire, for example, in the area, you may need to evacuate very quickly. And then finally, it's really important to have a plan on how to connect with loved ones. I think we've watched a number of disasters, especially the forest fires out in California, where it was really difficult to find their loved ones after the fire swept through. So you should have a plan where you might meet, especially if you have to evacuate quickly, you know, whether you're going to go to somebody else's house where people could try and locate you. Next one, please. Again, you should have plans for shelter in place. We recommend you have a 3-day supply of food and water for each person in your home. Don't forget about individual diet needs and plan for your pets. So I know before a major storm event, if it's predicted, I usually try to do a big shopping so I have enough food on hand. Although it's also good to have just regular non-perishable supplies just there whenever you need them. Make sure you have a first aid kit and keep it up to date with medicines and other things. And don't forget to have tools and special items, flashlight, extra batteries, and important documents. In our case, we have a little firebox that we keep all of our documents in. And we've done this for about 20 years. We know that if we were ever asked to evacuate, the one thing that we would try to remember to put in the car first and foremost is this box with all of our documents. And we have a little bit of extra cash there as well. Next slide, please. You should also have an evacuation kit. Have supplies ready either in your car or in your backpack in case you need to leave home. Make sure you pack lightly and include basic supplies for at least 24 to 48 hours. In my car, in the back, I have a little sort of hidden storage. I keep a couple of decks of cards and a book on card games, because if you evacuate, the chances are you're going to be sitting around without much to do for a while if you're in a shelter or someplace else. So that's just something that's there. I know it's there. Hopefully I'll never have to use it. Next question, slide. Okay, so now I'd like you to sort of start your personal plan or thinking about it. Sorry. Fine. Sorry. Finally, the other thing is to have a plan on how to connect, and Henry will share the communication plan with you. It writes down all your important household information, names, telephone numbers, etc., emails. I know for me, I only have my cell phone now. I forget my own children's telephone number because I just press Maggie or Anita when I call them. So it's a good idea to write it down so you have it in case your cell phone isn't working. The other thing is, once you have developed your plan and your emergency kit, it's really a good idea to revisit it every 6 months with everyone in your house to make sure it's still up to date. Plans, people change, move or do different things, so you need to do that. And keep in mind that your food and medications will expire and phone numbers change. And again, with medications, try and make sure you always cycle it through so you're not left with way outdated medications. So finally, last slide, next slide. And next one. So finally, just remember to remember your neighbors, and if you know neighbors that need help, encourage them to plan ahead. Once you're prepared, you can also help others prepare. And during an emergency, you might want to check in on your neighbors and make sure that they are safe as well. With community preparedness, it's improved when we work with our neighbors, our family, and our friends all together so that we all will survive through the crisis. Okay.
All right. So we're going to have another discussion. So our first question that we have is, how confident or ready are you to survive 3 days in your own home without help? We'll use either the chat function or can do the raise hand function as well. I have Elle says that she feels pretty confident that she'll be good in her own home. Susan also says she's pretty confident as well. And Betty, that's really good to hear. I'm liking these responses. You guys feel pretty confident. It's great. And then, all right. So then our next question is, what would you need in order to feel more ready or be more ready if you don't feel that you are at that point yet? You can either answer through the chat, or if you'd like to use the hands up function, you can. I have James here. He says feels fairly confident. One thing you need to learn is utility shops for his apartment. Okay, that's a good one. Gas, electricity, and water, just in case. That's good to know. Betty says make backup copies of the important documents and have them ready to go, which is a good one too, because we don't think about grabbing all those documents in case of emergency. To have those ready, that'll be a good start. And then Susan says that she has it for pretty much all at home, which is great. That is great to hear. I'm really happy to hear that everyone feels like they're pretty prepared. Okay, so let's go on to the next slide. Sorry.
Sorry, Jane. I just wanted to mention that Susan had a good suggestion, and that is to remember to charge a portable cell phone battery, which are pretty cheap to acquire too. So
that is a good point. Yes. Oh, I didn't see that. Oh, those in the Q&A. Thank you, Susan. Yeah, exactly. Those are, you can pretty much get them at Walmart, even Amazon for pretty cheap. And so just, to have those charged ready ahead of time, and especially with the cords that correlate with your devices. Because I know me, I'd grab a cord and it probably wouldn't be the right port to go with my device, but make sure you have the right cord along with it too. That's a good one. So we can move on to the next slide. And so we are wrapping up for this webinar. And in conclusion, wrapping up, we're going to actually do our post survey. So if we want to pull up for the next slide. So this is going to be the same exact survey that we did in the very beginning of the webinar, which was the pre one. So Henry will have that prompted up for you guys to answer. And so again, there's going to be the same exact question. So we'll have page 1 and page 2. So we'll allow some time for you guys to fill that out. So the purpose of the post survey is just to see what you guys, the knowledge that you've obtained from the webinar, just kind of getting a snapshot of that. And this will also help so we can get also you guys registered for the drawing later on for today for the flashlight and radio giveaway. So this will just be just a page 1 right now. Actually, yep. So we are about a little over halfway done. So we'll wait for just a little bit more. And so this actually will only be the only page. I apologize about earlier, I misspoken, but this will be the only page that you'll need to fill out. Just wait a little bit more. About 3/4 of the way there. I'm just going to give it a few more seconds and then we are going to wrap it up. Almost there, guys. Think you can win a flashlight radio with this. Okay. Okay. All right. So I think that was everyone that is going to complete it. So we can go on for our next slide. So for the flashlight radio giveaway, we're going to take everybody who did both the pre and post survey. So anyone that has stayed for the whole webinar. So make sure that you, we'll be drawing that randomly by names who did the pre and post survey, just to make sure that, you know, we get everyone's chance to get it. And then we'll email everybody who has won the drawing. And that way you'll communicate with you on how you can receive your flashlight/radio giveaway. I also, so the last slide I wanted to see, so thank you all for, you know, listening and attending our webinar today. So I know ideally we'd like to do it in person, but just given the pandemic, it'd be safer, you know, to have it virtually, and we hope it all went well. I wanted to ask anyone if any had any questions or any concerns or any comments that they'd like to bring up and ask any of our panelists here today. You can use either the Q&A function, you can use the chat function. If you'd like to raise your hand, you can do so as well too.
Jane, can I put in a little shameless plug for us as well?
Yes, of
So
course.
I'm part of the Community Outreach Office for New Hampshire Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and we go to organizations, fairs, any sort of community event, and can do presentations for anybody out in the community there. We have adult presentations, but then we also do K through 3rd grade as well. We have Ready the Prepared Puppy, which is our mascot, and he can visit schools or community events. We went to the Deerfield Summer Program last week, and that was a huge success. So I'm going to give, well, Henry, you've got my information, but I'll send it to you again. If you could send that out to everybody that's participated. And if anybody has any questions, they can reach out. Also, a number of the materials that were shown to you today, you'll see at the bottom of the presentation screen, readynh.gov. That is our state website, and there are a lot of materials on there that can help you with emergency preparedness. So you can find the alerts there, find all the forms that were shown to you today. So it's a really good resource as well.
Thank you, Vanessa. So I do see a question in the Q&A. My answer this live. Is there any additional tips for families who may have children going off to college? Should their college students also have their own emergency kit for school as well? Would anyone else from our panelists like to answer that? Or Sylvia, I see you go off mic.
Yeah, that's a very good question. Again, I think having your communication plan with your child is really critical. Sort of talk about where they might go if they were forced to evacuate. You know, if they're at a school where there's a family member nearby, maybe that would be a good place for them to go. Make sure they've written down the phone numbers for everybody in case something happens to their cell phone. Most schools have, you know, instructions for students there. They should definitely pay attention to it, review it. It's usually done during orientation. At least I know at Keene State College we had that. Just if you could run over some of these things with them before they go off to school so they've thought about it. Something that's doesn't have to do with severe weather, but you know, where college students are often in crowded venues and whatnot. One of the tips I gave my children, which I think was really important, was if you're in a crowded venue, the first thing you should do is look for emergency exits. And if for some reason you have to get out of a building quickly, a lot of times it's better to go to a side emergency exit because everybody else tries to go through the entrance that they came in originally. And that's I think the most important piece of advice that I could give.
Thank you, Sylvie. I think that was very well answered. Do we have any more questions? And I can't tell if we had a hand raised at any point. Have we had a hand raised at all?
No, I didn't see one, Jane.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you everyone for attending our webinar. We hope it was really, informational for everybody, and especially, first time doing a Zoom webinar as well for our training. And I want to thank Vanessa Valangi for being here as well, Sylvie Rice for being here, and Henry Underwood for helping us organize and have this webinar for everyone, and all the hard work that was put into this. Thank you all so much.
We just got a severe thunderstorm watch for Cheshire County too. So anybody who's on here, just be aware.
Thank you.
Oh, thank you, Vanessa. Perfect timing of their webinar.
Yeah,
as
right at the
well.
end there. Gotta get to posting to Facebook. Yes.
All right, well, thank you everyone. And so everyone, make sure you stay safe, and again, starting on those emergency kits and stay-go kits, and then with your communication plans as well. And just with Vanessa had mentioned too, it's perfect timing. Thank you, everyone. You have a great day.
Thank you, everyone.